What's going on, everybody? This is Clydean Fair. Let's talk about War Tales, my personal builds and unit composition edition. So first things first, some of you guys have asked me in the comments on what my overall strategy is when it comes down to recommended team or unit roster sizes that I bring into battle, as well as overall composition on what unit types I use and what classes I use. So I'm going to try and cram as much information as I possibly can into as short of a time frame as I can. So make sure you guys pause or utilize this little like chapter thing that I'm starting to do at the bottom of the videos to better make it easier for you guys to navigate and rewatch. So first things first, elephant in the room. I highly recommend sticking between 8 or 12 units. You can go less than that. Coverage gets a little weird on professions at that point. But overall, for me to feel like I have a solid spread and command over the entire map, I like to stick between 8 and 12. Anything over 12 starts to make combat pretty slow. Anything under 8, I feel like I'm not getting quite as well-rounded as I personally like. When it comes down to oils, I highly recommend looking into unstable oil as your primary oil on all of your melee units that are close range melee units, such as warriors, swordsmen, brutes, rangers. And I also recommend grabbing perforating oil on your ranged units, such as spearmen and archers, because perforating really helps get through that guard and it just increases your damage output altogether. As for secondary oils, which you can unlock after a level 7 in the wisdom path, you can kind of get a little creative with that. I am a huge fan of using infectious oil or explosive oil, and that essentially increases damage output. I use explosive oil on multi-hit units, such as a one-handed berserker with an axe that hits, 4, 5 plus times in quick succession, because that will do at least a quarter of an enemy's HP in one round, and that's straight through armor. Another build I highly recommend using explosive on would be the Legion Spear that attacks 4 times in quick succession. That will really help as well, because you're looking at another 20% of max HP through armor or anything like that. Whereas the infectious oil, I'm a huge fan of because it's essentially a splitter passive, but it's applied to all abilities and attacks, and it really pairs well with unstable oil as well. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dig on into my first class or role overview, and that is my frontline. My frontline, I generally divide between my tanks and my DPS. My DPS are almost exclusively warriors or brutes. My tanks are mostly swordsmen. So starting off, we'll get into the tanks. Now, I do like using brutes as tanks as well, but in this particular playthrough and example, we're going to use only swordsmen. I have 2 separate iterations of a similar build that is generally used for soaking damage as well as holding choke points. I use these units to engage enemies and activate bulwark, which then gives them deflection. I use my protector to give everyone protection, so in combination with deflection and protection, I only take 1 damage from the next attack, and then I try to maneuver them into a way that I'm only being attacked once or twice by enemy units in a round, and then this wall of enemies starts to become an obstacle for other enemy units, and they have to start navigating around them, and it takes up more movement, and it essentially creates a false choke point that I can then utilize for my DPS units and keep my units from taking damage. Essentially, I'm mitigating damage not by removing enemies really quickly, but by outmaneuvering them on the map. And that's what these 2 builds are for. Next, I go into my melee DPS units. I only have 1 brute. This is meant as a get into position, utilize large AoE attacks, make sure I'm next to an enemy unit so I can potentially proc unstable oil and get an extra hit in, and then I leave. And this is actually really similar to most of my builds for this playstyle, because next up I have 2 warriors, one of which is a one-handed axe user that has the natural strike, so it always applies oils on its natural strike, and then I also utilize the berserker with him. He does a decent amount of damage for single target target, and then he's able to get out of the way or stay engaged. He's kind of an off tank. And then I have my two-handed axe user, which utilizes splitter, and I play my two-handed axe very similar to how I play my brute. I get in, position myself to where I can hit multiple enemies with my AoE while also being right next to somebody to try and take advantage of unstable oil, and then I try to leave as quickly as possible. After this, I get into my more DPS oriented roles, which is my archer and my ranger. First up, I have my ranger. This is a unique assassin build that is not as mobile as I would like it to be, but it is pretty nice for being able to simply sit behind a tank, walk through the enemy units and the tank, backstab, and then quickly walk back through and sit behind the tank again. I use this to help generate more damage output, as well as reduce the amount of damage that tanks will be taking in the upcoming rounds. Next up, I have my archer. My archer is very much an Overwatch. I have them set up with the Legion bow, which gives you an extra attack upon crit. So essentially it is a crit machine. I use it to attack a couple of times with its regular attack, and then I will put down the overarching infantryman zone of control fire and pray for the best to get some more damage output that way. I will also set them behind the tank. And then last but not least, I have my two spearmen. Now my spearmen are, to me, super important for my playstyle because I utilize them to expand my choke points. Essentially, if you use spearmen as pikemen, and these spearmen are actually built the exact same when it comes down to overall specialization wise and stat spreads, but I have two different weapons with them. One has the Legion spear, which attacks multiple times, and the other is the legendary spear here that helps with disengagement. I use the legendary spear disengagement to support my tank and potentially help get them out of a bind while covering my flanks with a spear wall, and I utilize the other one to deal more consistent damage while also utilizing spear wall to also secure another flank. So essentially the way I operate this entire combination of roles is I utilize my tanks and my spearmen to force enemies into a funnel or make them waste multiple rounds of turns running around the map and other obstacles in order for them to reach me. And hopefully by the time they manage to get across the map, I've already taken out the other ones that were engaged with my tanks, which then gives me opportunity to reposition and remaneuver. So essentially I'm dividing the enemy forces as much as I possibly can and only really being engaged with 2 or 3 at a time. And this is why I'm able to easily take on enemy units that are multiple levels over my level, as well as me not being concerned with a complete meta shift because I don't utilize the glass cannon meta in my overall playstyle. I am much more of a control the entire battlefield, divide, and then conquer the enemy. Since I utilize that type of playstyle, I'm really not worried about meta shifts or anything of the sorts. I highly recommend checking out other utility-based classes and or specializations for roles such as the Ranger or the Archer or the Spearman, and they will really help you round out your overall battle strategy and help you in the case of a meta shift, or honestly understand the mechanics of the game better to where you're able to have these types of combats and not necessarily, well, this isn't best in slot, so I'm not going to use it sort of thing. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this content. And if you'd like to see more videos such as this, drop a comment, like the video, make that number go up, and I hope to catch you all in my stream chat or in my comment section. Until next time, have a good one.